I've always believed that cities breathe. That they inhale with the rush of traffic and exhale with the quiet hum of midnight. Seattle, my city, is no different. It breathes in with the rumble of buses, the chatter spilling from coffee shops, the footsteps on rain-slick sidewalks. It breathes out in the still moments, when the streets glisten under street lamps and the sky hangs low, gray and heavy, like it's holding back some secret it can't quite confess. That's where I'll start, because secrets have a way of staining everything, even the rain. My name is Michael Turner. I'm 36 years old, husband of a woman I once believed I understood better than anyone, and an IT consultant who spends too much time staring at screens. My life, up until not long ago, could have been described as predictable, even enviable to some. Stable marriage, steady job, decent apartment near Capitol Hill, and just enough money to enjoy a good glass of whiskey on a Friday night. Anna, my wife, was the constant in that equation. She was my balance. She taught English at a high school near Green Lake, and she carried herself with the kind of warmth that drew people in. When she laughed, heads turned. When she spoke, students listened. She had this way of placing her hand on my arm during dinner, as if to anchor me, remind me I wasn't floating alone in the noise of the world. But the truth is, I didn't start this story with suspicion. I started it with comfort. And maybe that was the first mistake, believing that comfort is permanent, that the life you build can't be dismantled brick by brick, night by night, until one morning you look around and realize the foundation is cracked. It was a Tuesday when I noticed the first crack. A rainy Tuesday, which doesn't narrow things down in Seattle, but this rain felt heavier, louder. The kind that drowns conversation if you're walking outside together, and makes you grateful for the roof overhead. Anna was late that evening. Normally, she texted me if she stayed after class to grade papers or talk to a student. But that night, nothing. I made pasta, poured 2 glasses of red wine, and waited with the faint hum of the dishwasher filling the silence. By the time she walked in, 45 minutes later than usual, I had convinced myself it was traffic. I wanted to believe it so badly that when she offered the explanation before I could ask, I didn't question it. Sorry, she said, shaking the rain from her hair as she closed the door. A student needed help with their essay. Lost track of time. She kissed me, a quick press of lips, and moved past me to hang her coat. I remember the scent of her shampoo, lavender, familiar, but faintly mixed with something sharper. Not perfume. Not hers, anyway. Something I couldn't place. I told myself it was nothing. Of course it was nothing. But the pasta was cold by then, and for the first time in years, we ate mostly in silence. Looking back, it wasn't the lateness that unsettled me. It was the way she avoided my eyes when she set her fork down. The way her phone buzzed once on the table and she flipped it over, screen down, before I could glance at it. A student, I thought again. Just a student. But the city outside our window seemed to know better. The rain pattered harder, drumming against the glass like a warning. Seattle in November doesn't forgive easily. The sun is a stranger, the wind sneaks under your collar, and every corner smells faintly of damp pavement and espresso. It's a city that teaches you to live with melancholy, to find rhythm in gray. For years, Anna and I found comfort in it together. Sunday mornings at Pike Place, coffee in paper cups while watching the fishmongers toss salmon across wet counters. Evenings curled up on our worn leather couch, the soundtrack of rain against the windows. Those moments used to feel unshakable, eternal. But when you begin to doubt the person sitting next to you, even the city feels different. The streets are colder. The cafes louder. The rain less forgiving. That's how suspicion works, it takes the ordinary and stains it with unease. I didn't confront her that week. I told myself it was paranoia. Work stress. Maybe even jealousy, though I had no reason to be jealous. I buried the thought under hours of coding projects and half-hearted gym sessions. But late at night, when Anna fell asleep beside me, I'd stare at the ceiling and replay every detail, the faint scent, the silence over pasta, the phone flipped screen down. One night, she mumbled in her sleep. A name. I couldn't catch it, not fully, but it wasn't mine. My heart thudded against my ribs, loud enough that I thought it might wake her. I lay there, eyes open to the ceiling fan, and wondered when my life had stopped feeling like mine. I'll tell you something about secrets, they rarely appear fully formed. They leak. They drip into your life, a little at a time, until the puddle is too big to ignore. And that puddle had begun to spread. The next Sunday, Anna said she was meeting a colleague for lesson planning at a cafe downtown. That wasn't unusual, she often collaborated with other teachers. But when I asked who, she hesitated a second too long. Just long enough for me to notice. Rachel, she said finally. You remember Rachel? The history teacher. I nodded, but something about the way she adjusted her scarf before leaving felt rehearsed. When she was gone, I sat on the couch, staring at the blank television screen, listening to the rain pound harder against the glass. Seattle rain doesn't lie. It seeps, it exposes, it refuses to stop until you pay attention. That was the first time I considered following her. I didn't. Not that day. But the thought had planted itself, and thoughts like that have a way of growing roots. At night, I found myself watching her more closely. The way she laughed at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. The way she turned her body slightly away when she typed. None of it was damning on its own, but together it painted a picture I didn't want to see. And yet, I loved her. God, I loved her. That's the cruel part about suspicion, love doesn't vanish when trust begins to crack. It lingers, twisting inside you, making you hope that you're wrong even as every sign tells you you're right. The city kept breathing around us. Exhaling in the mornings, with commuters rushing under umbrellas. Inhaling at night, with the hum of bars and neon lights reflected on wet streets. And I kept breathing with it, pretending I didn't notice the silence stretching wider between us, pretending I didn't see the shadow that had begun to fall across my marriage. But Seattle rain doesn't forgive. And neither do secrets. They say trust is like glass. When it shatters, you can try to glue it back together, but the cracks will always show. I used to believe our marriage was unbreakable glass, thick, tempered, impossible to damage. But what I didn't realize was that even the strongest glass can fracture if you don't notice the first hairline crack. And mine came not with a scream, but with a whisper. It was a Thursday evening, the kind where the city felt heavier than usual. Rain drizzled in slow sheets, not the dramatic kind of storm but the endless drizzle that seeps into your bones. I left the office later than I meant to, computer screen still glowing behind me as I walked out. The parking garage smelled of damp concrete, echoing with distant footsteps. Anna had told me she'd be home late, again. Staff meeting, she said that morning, pulling on her coat, kissing my cheek before rushing out the door. Nothing unusual. Teachers had meetings. I'd heard that excuse before. But as I sat in my car, watching the rain beat across the windshield, the unease that had been gnawing at me for weeks pressed harder. Something about her tone that morning had been too quick, too clipped. Like she had rehearsed it. I should have gone home. Heated up leftovers. Poured myself a drink. Pretended not to notice the empty chair across from me at dinner. But instead, my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and a thought surfaced, uninvited and relentless: follow her. I told myself I wouldn't. I told myself I trusted her. But my car seemed to move on its own, turning left instead of right, heading toward her school. By the time I parked across the street from the brick building, my heart was pounding against my ribs. Most of the windows were dark, but a few glowed faintly. I could make out silhouettes moving behind the curtains in the teacher's lounge. I waited. 10 minutes. 15. My palms sweaty against the steering wheel. Then I saw her. Anna stepped out of the side door, her coat pulled tight, her scarf wrapped high. She wasn't alone. A man followed, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the glow of the street lamp. I couldn't make out his face, but I could see the way he leaned toward her, just slightly, as they walked. Too close for colleagues. Too close for casual. Anna laughed at something he said, her head tilting back, her hand brushing his arm for the briefest moment. That laugh, it used to belong to me. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles whitened. My first instinct was to start the car, to follow them wherever they were going. But I froze, torn between the need to know and the fear of confirming what I already suspected. They didn't get into the same car. He headed toward a black sedan, she toward her own silver Honda. They spoke for a few more seconds, words muffled by the rain. Then she slipped inside, started the engine, and drove off in the opposite direction. I stayed there long after both cars disappeared, staring at the empty street, listening to the rain hammering against the roof of my car. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was enough to carve the first crack deep into the glass of my trust. When I finally made it home, Anna was already there. She had changed into sweatpants and one of my old hoodies, curled on the couch with a mug of tea. She looked up when I walked in, smiling softly, as if nothing in the world had shifted. "You're late," she said. "Long day." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Yeah. Long day." I wanted to ask her. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to tell her I'd seen her laughing with a man I couldn't name. But instead, I hung up my coat, kissed the top of her head, and sat beside her on the couch. Because the truth was, I wasn't ready for the answer. That night, lying in bed, I could hear the faint tap of rain against the window. Anna's breathing was steady, peaceful, as if sleep came easily to her. My own eyes refused to close. The image of her hand brushing his arm replayed over and over in my mind. That small, innocent gesture felt louder than thunder. And for the first time, I began to wonder, was our marriage already slipping away from me, piece by piece, while I clung desperately to the illusion that it was whole? The crack had formed. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's strange how quickly you start noticing things you used to overlook. Once suspicion plants its seed, the world sharpens, every detail a clue, every silence an accusation. Before that Thursday, Anna's habits felt ordinary, predictable, even comforting. After it, every action seemed heavy with hidden meaning. The first pattern was the phone. She'd always been attached to it, most people are, but lately it rarely left her hand. If she wasn't holding it, it was face down on the table, as if the screen itself was dangerous. When she typed, her thumbs moved quickly, her shoulders angled away from me. One night, as we sat at the kitchen table finishing dinner, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then at me, then slid it into her lap under the table. "Who's that?" I asked, forcing my tone to sound casual. She didn't look up. "Just Rachel. She's stressing about lesson plans again." She smiled, but it was too quick, too practiced. I nodded, pretending to accept it, but inside, the crack widened. Because I remembered Rachel, awkward, scatterbrained, incapable of typing more than a 2-word text without 10 typos. But Anna's fingers moved fast, fluid, like she was speaking fluently in another language. The second pattern was time. She stayed late more often, grading essays, parent meetings, committee discussions. The excuses piled up neatly, stacked like papers on a desk. But each one came with that same rehearsed tone, the same slight hesitation before the lie slipped into place. And every time she came home, I noticed something small. A fresh spritz of perfume when she never wore it for school, lipstick reapplied though she claimed she'd been grading papers. Once, I caught a faint trace of cologne on her scarf, not mine. Never mine. The third pattern was distance. Not physical, at first. We still shared the same bed, the same meals, the same apartment. But she drifted in subtle ways, her laughter a little forced, her eyes sliding past mine when I tried to hold them. Conversations that once flowed easily now felt like interviews, her answers clipped, my questions waited. She was present, but not with me. Her body was here, but her mind belonged to someone else. Seattle itself seemed to mirror the shift. The streets felt darker, the rain colder. Even the coffee shops we used to love seemed louder, the chatter of strangers unbearable when she sat across from me, scrolling through her phone instead of meeting my eyes. I started walking home from work just to clear my head, weaving through Pike Place Market after the stalls had closed, the smell of fish and damp wood lingering in the air. I'd watch couples huddled together under umbrellas and wonder if anyone else felt as hollow as I did, walking beside the person they loved and feeling utterly alone. The hardest part wasn't the suspicion itself. It was the not knowing. If she had confessed, if she had said the words out loud, I could have faced them. Anger, grief, betrayal, at least those emotions have names. But silence? Silence is shapeless. It eats away at you slowly, with no clear enemy to fight. So I started looking for answers on my own. One evening, while she showered, I picked up her phone from the nightstand. My hands trembled as I tried her passcode, though I already knew it, her birthday. It didn't work. She had changed it. That told me more than any message could have. I set the phone back down before the water stopped running, my heart hammering in my chest. I felt like a criminal in my own home, sneaking around a woman I had once trusted with everything. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern solidified. Her laughter at messages she never shared. The late nights that stretched later. The hollow excuses. I began keeping my own patterns, mental notes of times, dates, details. I became an observer in my own life, cataloging evidence I didn't yet have the courage to confront. But the worst moment came on a quiet Saturday morning. We were sitting in the living room, the rain tapping steadily against the windows, the city muffled in gray. Anna was curled up with her laptop, supposedly working on lesson plans. I was sipping coffee, pretending to read the newspaper. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She reached for it, but not before I caught a glimpse of the notification. It wasn't Rachel. It wasn't any name I recognized. Just a single letter, E. She grabbed the phone too quickly, typing a response with a faint smile tugging at her lips. And just like that, the shadow had a shape. The city kept breathing around us, indifferent to the fracture widening in our home. Seattle rain whispered against the glass, steady and endless, as if urging me to listen. And for the first time, I wasn't just suspicious. I was certain. Words used to flow so easily between us. Anna and I could talk for hours, about books, about our students, about politics or movies or which takeout place had the best Thai food in Capitol Hill. Our conversations were the invisible thread that kept us tethered together. But threads can fray. And when they do, silence seeps in through the gaps. It began with small pauses. We'd sit down to dinner, candles flickering on the table, and I'd ask about her day. Busy, she'd say, her fork pushing food around her plate. The kids were restless. And that was it. No stories. No laughter. No anecdotes about the student who always fell asleep in the back row or the one who doodled dragons in the margins of essays. Just busy. I tried to fill the silence with my own stories from work, about the endless software bugs, about the coworker who brought his dog into the office again. She'd nod politely, smile faintly, but her eyes would drift, glassy and far away. It wasn't that she wasn't listening. It was worse. She was somewhere else entirely. One night, I decided to push. We were on the couch, the TV flickering with some sitcom laugh track that neither of us was really watching. I muted the volume. Anna, I said quietly. What's going on with you? Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide, almost startled. What do you mean? You've been distant. Distracted. You barely talk to me anymore. She let out a small laugh, forced, brittle. Michael, I'm just tired. Work's been insane. You're overthinking. Am I? I asked. My voice sounded sharper than I intended. Because it feels like you're here, but not really here. Like I'm losing you. Her lips parted, but no words came. She stared at me for a long moment, then looked down at her hands. You're not losing me, she whispered finally. I promise. But the way her voice cracked, the way she wouldn't meet my eyes, it told me otherwise. After that night, conversations became even shorter. She'd bury herself in lesson plans, I'd retreat into work emails. We moved around the apartment like polite strangers, careful not to bump into each other too hard, careful not to let the silence grow too loud. But silence has weight. It presses down, fills the air, makes every sound sharper. I noticed the smallest things, the way she typed quickly on her phone and angled the screen away. The way she laughed softly at messages I couldn't see. The way she jumped when I walked into the room unexpectedly. All of it lived between words. In the pauses. In the half-finished sentences. In the sighs at the end of the night when she thought I was asleep. Seattle itself seemed to speak in half-sentences. Rain tapping against the windows but never pounding. Fog rolling in over the sound, hiding half the city from view. Neon lights glowing faintly in puddles but blurring before you could read the signs. The city spoke in fragments. And so did we. One evening, after another strained dinner, I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. She froze, startled, as if my touch was foreign. Anna, I said. If something's wrong, if something's changed, I need you to tell me. She pulled her hand back slowly, folding it into her lap. Nothing's wrong, she murmured. I just need space sometimes. Space. That word landed heavier than a confession. I lay awake that night, listening to her steady breathing beside me, wondering how much space she needed, and who was filling it. The rain outside whispered against the glass, 1,000 voices I couldn't quite decipher. But I knew what they were saying. You already know the truth. You're just waiting to hear it out loud. Clues don't always arrive like thunderclaps. Sometimes they slip quietly into your life, disguised as nothing at all, until you look closer. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. The first clue came in the pocket of her coat. It was a Wednesday morning, the sky still heavy with dawn, rain whispering against the glass. Anna had left for work in a rush, forgetting her umbrella. I went to grab it for her, thinking I'd drive by the school and surprise her with coffee, maybe remind her of what we still had. When I reached for her navy coat, something crinkled inside the pocket. A receipt. I almost tossed it aside, just another Starbucks slip, I thought, but the name at the top wasn't familiar. The Oak Room. Not a cafe. Not a place we'd ever been together. A wine bar downtown, tucked away near Pioneer Square. I knew it because my coworker had raved about their private booths and candlelit tables. Romantic. Intimate. Not the kind of place you took a colleague to talk about lesson plans. The date printed on the receipt was last Friday. 10:37 p.m. 2 glasses of Pinot Noir. At 10:37 p.m. last Friday, Anna had told me she was grading essays. My hands shook as I folded the receipt back into the pocket, exactly where I'd found it. It felt like touching a live wire. I wanted to confront her right then, storm into her classroom, slam the paper down on her desk. But I didn't. Because part of me still hoped there was another explanation. And part of me wasn't ready to hear the truth spoken out loud. The second clue came a few days later. Anna was in the shower, steam fogging the bathroom mirror, when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But temptation doesn't ask for permission. The screen lit up, and there it was again. The single letter, E. No last name. No picture. Just the initial, glowing on the screen like a brand. The message preview was only 3 words, "Can't stop thinking." Before I could read the rest, the screen went dark. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. I set the phone back down just as the water stopped running. Anna emerged wrapped in a towel, humming softly, her hair dripping onto the floor. She smiled at me, casual, unbothered, and I felt like the walls of the room were closing in. I smiled back, because what else could I do? But inside, something was breaking. The third clue wasn't physical, it was in her voice. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and heard her speaking softly on the phone. Her tone was gentle, warmer than it had been with me in weeks. She laughed quietly, then paused, listening. When she noticed me, she ended the call too quickly, slipping the phone into her pocket. "Who was that?" I asked. She hesitated. "Rachel." The lie slid too easily off her tongue. I saw it in her eyes, the flicker of guilt she tried to bury with a smile. Clues. Little accidents. Receipts, initials, half-heard conversations. Individually, maybe they meant nothing. But together, they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. A picture of a woman I loved disappearing into the shadows of someone else's arms. Seattle didn't soften the blow. The rain was relentless that week, pounding against the windows as if echoing the chaos in my chest. The streets glistened with reflections, red brake lights smeared across wet pavement, neon signs dripping into puddles. Every corner of the city felt like it was mocking me with secrets I couldn't quite reach. At night, lying beside her, I stared at the ceiling, wondering if she was thinking of him. Wondering if his face hovered in her mind while mine faded into the background. And worst of all, wondering if she loved him. The clues were no longer accidental. They were evidence. And evidence demanded a verdict. Silence is heavier than any word. It presses against your chest, fills the space between breaths, lingers in every room until even the walls seem to echo with it. Our apartment, once full of laughter and late-night conversations, had become a mausoleum of unspoken truths. Anna moved through it like a ghost, her presence felt but untouchable. I lived beside her, but I might as well have been living alone. At work, I wore my mask. I smiled at coworkers, nodded at clients, answered emails with forced enthusiasm. But beneath it all, silence gnawed at me. I carried it like a stone in my pocket, always there, weighing me down. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring out the office window, watching the drizzle blur the skyline. I wondered how many other men sat at desks in glass towers, carrying the same secret burden, pretending everything was fine while their world quietly fell apart. At home, the silence was worse. We still went through the motions, cooking dinner, folding laundry, paying bills. But it was mechanical, devoid of intimacy. Her smile felt rehearsed, her touch absent, her laughter muted. I wanted to scream. To shatter the silence with accusations, to demand answers, to force the truth into the light. But every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck in my throat. Because once spoken, the truth can't be unsaid. And part of me still clung to the fragile hope that I was wrong. One night, we lay side by side in bed, the glow of the street lamp casting pale light across the ceiling. I could hear the rain against the glass, steady and endless. "Anna," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She shifted, half asleep. "I miss you," I said. The words broke something inside me as they left my lips. She didn't answer. Or maybe she couldn't. Her breathing deepened, slow and even, as if she had drifted back into sleep. But I lay awake for hours, staring into the dark, the weight of her silence pressing harder than any confession could. I tried to find distractions. I stayed later at the office, volunteering for projects I didn't care about. I went on long runs through Volunteer Park, the mist clinging to my skin until I couldn't tell whether it was sweat or rain. I drank too much whiskey on weekends, the burn in my throat easier to handle than the burn in my chest. But no matter what I did, the silence followed. It crept into my footsteps, into the clink of ice in a glass, into the sigh that escaped me when I thought no one could hear. The worst moments were the small ones. When I reached for her hand and she pulled away too quickly. When she laughed at her phone but couldn't tell me why. When her eyes drifted during dinner, as though she was listening to a voice only she could hear. Each moment was a pinprick, and together they bled me dry. Seattle itself seemed to share my silence. The rain was constant, steady, like background noise I couldn't shut off. The streets glistened under neon lights, but they felt empty, hollow. Even the familiar sound of the ferry horns across Elliott Bay felt distant, muffled, as if the city had turned its back on me. I'd sit by the window at night, a glass in my hand, watching headlights smear across the wet streets below. I imagined her with him, wherever he was. Talking, laughing, maybe touching his arm the way she used to touch mine. The silence in our apartment was nothing compared to the noise in my head. I began to wonder how long a man could carry silence before it crushed him completely. Because silence doesn't just weigh you down. It changes you. It makes you doubt not just the person beside you, but yourself. And I was no longer sure which of us I doubted more. Every story has a turning point. The place where waiting is no longer an option, where silence becomes unbearable, and where the weight of truth presses so hard you either face it, or let it crush you. For me, that point came on a Friday night. I was supposed to be at a work happy hour. My colleagues crowded into some brewery in South Lake Union, laughing over flights of IPAs. I stayed just long enough to be seen, to force a smile, to nurse a beer I didn't want. Then I slipped out, telling them I had family plans. But really, I had no plans at all. Only a gnawing emptiness, and a question that refused to be ignored. Where was Anna? She'd told me she had a late parent conference. That phrase should have sounded ordinary, but instead it rang like a hollow bell. I'd begun to recognize the pattern. Whenever she used too many words, too specific, too formal, it was a lie. So instead of heading home, I drove toward her school. The parking lot was empty when I arrived, except for one car I recognized instantly, her silver Honda. The building was dark, no parent meetings in sight. My stomach twisted. I turned off the engine and waited, my breath fogging the windshield. Minutes dragged. Finally, the side door opened. Anna stepped out, her coat pulled tight against the drizzle. She wasn't alone. The man from before, the tall one with the dark hair, walked beside her. They paused near her car, talking in low voices. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The way she tilted her head toward him, the way he leaned in just a little too close, it was enough. At one point, she laughed softly, her hand brushing his sleeve. That touch again. The touch that used to belong to me. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. My chest felt tight, my jaw clenched, every instinct screaming at me to storm across the lot and tear the truth out of them. But I didn't move. Because confrontation is a point of no return. And I wasn't ready, not yet. They spoke for a few more minutes before parting. He walked toward a black sedan, she slid into her Honda. I ducked low in my seat as she drove past, her headlights briefly illuminating my car. My heart hammered in my chest, certain she'd recognize me. But she didn't even glance my way. I sat there long after both cars had gone, the drizzle turning into steady rain, streaking the windshield until the world outside blurred. Crossroads. That's what this was. I could keep pretending. Keep drowning in silence, convincing myself the cracks weren't there. Or I could follow the road toward truth, no matter how jagged it cut. That night at home, she moved around the apartment casually, humming as she unpacked groceries, as if she hadn't just stepped out of the shadows of another man. How was the parent conference? I asked, my voice steady only because I forced it to be. She glanced at me briefly. Exhausting, she said, setting down a bag of apples. Some parents just don't listen. The lie slid smoothly, effortlessly. I nodded, my chest burning. Yeah. I bet. She didn't notice the edge in my tone. Or maybe she did, and she chose not to care. Later that night, lying beside her in the dark, I realized I couldn't stay at this crossroads forever. Silence had become poison, and I was drinking it daily. Soon, I would have to choose, confrontation or collapse. Truth or the slow death of denial. The rain outside didn't care which road I took. It just kept falling, steady and endless, as if reminding me that time never waits. Trust doesn't shatter all at once. It frays, thread by thread, until one day you're left holding nothing but scraps. That's where I was with Anna. The days blurred into each other, but the cracks in our life grew sharper. She started guarding her phone more closely. It was always face down on the counter, the screen dimmed before I could glance at it. She never used to care, she'd leave it lying around, unlocked, messages popping up while we cooked dinner or watched a movie. Now, it was practically glued to her hand. When I asked, she brushed it off with a laugh. It's just habit. Everyone's glued to their phone these days. Maybe that excuse would have worked months ago. Not now. Not after the parking lot. One evening, while she showered, I stood in the kitchen staring at her phone charging on the counter. My hands itched to pick it up, to scroll through her messages, to carve truth out of the digital silence. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because crossing that line meant no return. Instead, I poured whiskey into a glass and sat by the window, watching the rain distort the city lights. I told myself I wasn't weak, I was patient. That knowing the truth in my bones was enough, for now. But deep down, I knew patience was just fear in disguise. The unraveling showed in other ways too. She came home later, her excuses stacking like bricks, meetings, errands, traffic jams. Sometimes she was too tired for dinner, going straight to bed without eating. Other nights, she came back humming, her cheeks flushed, her eyes brighter than they'd been in months. Not from exhaustion. From him. I started keeping mental score. Every smile she didn't share with me, every moment she slipped out of reach, every lie spoken so smoothly it almost sounded like truth. The tally grew longer each day, and with it, my silence grew heavier. Our conversations turned brittle. How was your day? I'd ask. Busy, she'd answer, not looking up from her phone. Sometimes I pushed harder. With who? Her eyes would flick to mine, guarded. Colleagues. Parents. Why? And I'd back down, shaking my head, muttering something about curiosity. Because the truth was, I wasn't ready for the explosion her answers might bring. But each exchange left scars, invisible but deep. One night, we sat together on the couch, a movie flickering on the screen. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, as if nothing had changed. For a brief moment, I let myself believe in the illusion, that this was real, that she was mine again. Then her phone buzzed. She straightened too quickly, snatching it up, her thumb moving fast across the screen. The glow of the text lit her face, and in it, I saw something raw, anticipation, eagerness, warmth. Not for me. The unraveling wasn't just happening in secret anymore. It was happening right in front of me, thread by thread, until I could almost hear the fabric of our life tearing apart. That night, lying awake while she slept beside me, I made a decision. I couldn't keep watching silently. I couldn't keep pretending the threads would magically weave themselves back together. If she wouldn't hand me the truth, I would take it. Suspicion corrodes. It eats at the mind until every glance, every word, every silence becomes evidence of something darker. But suspicion alone isn't proof. And without proof, it's easy to gaslight yourself into doubt. I needed more. The chance came on a Wednesday evening. Anna had left her phone charging on the nightstand while she took a shower. Steam drifted from under the bathroom door, muffling the sound of running water. My heart pounded as I stood there, staring at the device like it was a live wire. One swipe. That's all it would take. One swipe, and the thin line between suspicion and truth would vanish forever. My hand shook as I picked it up. The lock screen glowed to life, numbers, waiting to be entered. For years, I knew her code. Our phones were open books to each other. But when I tried the old numbers, none worked. Changed. She had changed it. My chest tightened, the sting sharper than any slap. It wasn't just secrecy anymore, it was deliberate exclusion. I set the phone back down just as the water shut off. My pulse hammered in my ears. I poured myself a drink and pretended nothing happened when she emerged wrapped in a towel, humming softly. But inside, something broke. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring into the shadows, the sound of her breathing steady beside me. If her phone was locked, there were other ways. Over the next week, I became an investigator in my own life. I watched her routines more closely, noting when she left and returned, when her phone buzzed, when her excuses didn't line up. I checked our shared bank account, scrolling through transactions. Most were ordinary, groceries, gas, utilities. But then I saw them, 2 charges at restaurants we'd never been to, both on evenings she claimed to have faculty meetings. Both for 2 people. My hands went cold as I stared at the receipts, the names of places I didn't recognize but could easily imagine. Dim lighting, quiet tables, the kind of atmosphere made for stolen moments. Still, even that wasn't enough. I needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be twisted into another lie. So I made a choice I never thought I would, I followed her. It was a Thursday, the air heavy with rain. She said she'd be staying late to grade papers. I left work early, parked a few blocks from her school, and waited. Hours passed. The windows of the building went dark. And then, just like before, she appeared. Not alone. The man was with her, his hand brushing the small of her back as they walked toward his car. She laughed at something he said, tilting her face up to him in a way that made my chest ache. I took out my phone. For a moment, I just stared through the rain-streaked windshield, my thumb hovering over the camera button. And then I pressed it. Click. The proof burned onto my screen, undeniable, unshakable. I sat there long after they drove away, my phone heavy in my hand. Proof had a strange taste, metallic, bitter. I thought it would bring relief, some clarity to the storm inside me. Instead, it hollowed me out. Because suspicion lets you dream of being wrong. Proof doesn't. The truth hits harder than any lie. I had suspected. I had waited. I had gathered evidence, piece by piece. But nothing prepared me for the moment when the fragile illusion of our marriage shattered completely. It was Saturday evening. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, cold and relentless, as if the city itself were mourning with me. Anna was home, poring over lesson plans, humming softly. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it this time. I had the photos on my phone. The receipts. The timeline of lies meticulously catalogued in my mind. I didn't need proof anymore. I had everything. Anna, I said quietly. My voice trembled, but I forced it steady. She looked up. What is it? I held out the phone. The photos glowed, undeniable. Her face went pale. The casual warmth disappeared, replaced by something tight, almost brittle. Michael, she started, but I cut her off. Don't even try to explain. I let the silence stretch, the room heavy with it. Outside, the rain pounded harder, as if echoing the rhythm of my heartbeat. She sat down, wrapping her arms around herself, trembling. I didn't mean for it to. It just happened. I shook my head. It didn't just happen, Anna. It's been happening. And you lied. Every day, every night. You erased me from our own life. Tears brimmed in her eyes. I was lonely. I felt unseen. I was right here, I said, my voice breaking. Right here, every day. And you walked past me as if I didn't exist. And you think a few stolen moments justify that? The room felt smaller. The walls pressed in. My chest ached, not just from anger, but from grief for what we once had, for the life I thought we shared. She stood, facing me finally. I'm sorry, Michael. I didn't mean to hurt you. I swallowed, the weight of every unanswered question pressing down. Sorry doesn't fix this. Nothing can. Not anymore. I dropped the phone onto the coffee table. The photos glared up at her. Evidence. Truth. Shattered glass. We sat in silence after that, the sound of rain filling the void. I realized, then, that love doesn't always survive betrayal. That some cracks run too deep, some threads cannot be rewoven. And in that quiet, staring at her face, the woman I loved, who had become a stranger, I understood the only thing left to do. The next day, I moved my things into the guest room. We didn't argue. We didn't yell. We simply existed in separate spaces, the distance palpable, the intimacy gone. Weeks later, I filed for separation. Divorce papers followed. The city moved on outside our windows, unaware of the life quietly unspooling within these walls. Rain still fell on Seattle streets, indifferent, relentless, cleansing but never forgiving. Sometimes I think of her, of the small moments we shared before everything cracked, the coffees at Pike Place, the lazy Sunday mornings, the soft touch of her hand on my arm. And I mourn them. But I don't regret uncovering the truth. Because some secrets refuse to stay buried. And some truths, no matter how painful, demand to be seen. Seattle breathed around me as I packed my last boxes. Exhaling with the wind, inhaling the drizzle. And I walked into the gray, knowing that while love had shattered, I still had myself, and that, at least, could not be taken. The end.